Concentrate on the audio and not the video. In today's video, I want to talk about some of the biggest mistakes that I made operating a security company and operating a security training business. I think that the old adage of learn from the mistakes of others rather than learning from the mistakes of your own holds certainly true for the video. A little bit about my background. If those of you who are new to the channel, new to the videos, I got my PPO license, private photographer license, in 2010. It was like more or less April of 2010. At the same time, more or less, I got my TIF license. That's a training instructor firearms license. And then the TFF, training facility firearms license. And then I ended up owning a baton training facility. I was not the instructor. I had my own instructor cadre of one person. But that's what I had in 2010. I think the greatest piece of advice I want to give to anybody that's starting a business in the protection industry is don't bite more than you can chew. I used the shotgun approach, which meant I went out there trying to get as much contracts, courses going on, just everything. Oh, and okay, to top it all off, I had actually I still have my private investigator business. So I had, 3 or 4 different professional licenses at that point in time. So I was going after everything. I highly discourage you guys to go after everything. Just try to, I hate to use these cliche terms or these cliche, terms, but don't bite more than you can chew. What ends up happening is you lose focus. So if I'm trying to get everything at once, I start to lose focus. And when you lose focus, you're going to end up losing business. So what ended up happening was my PPO business was not successful. However, my training facilities flourished. And my private investigator business flourished as well. I actually had the Southern California contract for hundreds of cases that involve mortgage fraud. There was a company based out of Texas that I did contract work for, and they had thousands of open cases of mortgage fraud during that time. 2010 was a bad time. 2011 was a bad time for the housing industry. When the housing market crashed, mortgage insurance companies started to hire legal investigation agencies in an attempt to determine whether or not fraud occurred. And if fraud occurred, then they possibly didn't have to pay the mortgage insurance. I mean, it was a huge industry. And then I got another contract with my friend Kurt Kohler, who subcontracted from another agency, I think out of Florida, and I had all of Southern California. I mean, that's how successful I was in the private investigator business, and I did that for several years. As for the training company that I had at that point in time, it was mostly security, and at the time I was teaching at Kaplan College in Palm Springs, and then they formed into Brightwood College. Well, I got free use of the classroom, so I discounted all the students at that time. I think I charged them like $35 cash, $35 for the GAR class, and most of them were my students anyways, and they got like a 50% discount. I guess the agreement was I can bring in like 20 people from the outside or 30 people from the outside. And then during that point in time, I had students of mine from the college that were highly qualified to teach some of these classes, like the firearms portion. I could at least use them as range safety staff, right? And then I ended up hiring some of my students to do either some security gigs or private investigator assignments, and the college was happy because the career center, there's like a career center or job placement section of the college at that point in time, and because it was a for-profit college, you have to prove that the college is successfully placing students in the workforce, and we worked hand in hand. We worked hand in hand, but it was great, and I learned so many things. Like I said, the first thing is don't bite more than you can chew. I understand that I might be saying all these things that I did, and it may sound like I was biting more than I can chew, but the truth was I can bite all these private investigator assignments. I end up subcontracting, I think, with like one or two also licensed private investigators who helped me out. And then I did have an instructor cadre, right? It wasn't much. It was like 2 or 3 guys. But as for the private patrol operator side, the security contracts, I don't want to say I gave up, but I just let my license expire because all the business was coming from the private investigator side and then the training side. And at the same time, I think maybe about like 6 months after I got my PPO license, one of my buddies needed help with the private investigator license. So, we'd have these study sessions together, and then he ended up passing. So I'm like, you know what? If I can help somebody or coach somebody into passing one of the hardest or one of the harder exams in California, meaning the private investigator exam, I could probably help people pass the PPO test. So then I started having study sessions with private patrol operator candidates, and then they end up passing. And then there's one fellow, he didn't pass after 10 or 11 times, and then he passed. Eventually he passed, right? It took him like 2 or 3 times after me. I'm sure he holds the record for most times to fail, but maybe it wasn't 10, 11, it may have been 9. Again, I don't remember, but he really reached the limit of times to take. Now he almost reached the limit of time on when his license or the application was going to expire. I also learned during that time there's no need to have an office when you're starting off. I had an office. I had a pretty nice office in Chino, California, in the business district. And quite honestly, I would, there was just like nobody coming in the office. I did all my work like online through phone consultations and then through site visits. And then all the training that I did, I drove to Palm Springs, which was at the time like an hour and a half away. And I would just travel to the trainings that way, right? I found, honestly, the need that I found in the office was I took naps. I took naps in my office because I was so bored. And then I was getting stressed out, almost depressed, I would say, just because the private security contracts just wasn't working. But then at that point in time, I started getting the security training contracts or training agreements, and then the private investigator assignment. So it kind of worked out, but there just wasn't a need to have an office. I thought about a patrol car, but this doesn't make any sense. Why would I buy a patrol car if I don't have any security contracts? Why do I need an office if I already had training facilities? I had 2 colleges. Santa Barbara Business College had a training agreement with me, and they're based out of Palm Desert. And then Kaplan College, which turned into Brightwood College, which doesn't exist anymore. That's Palm Springs, and they let me use the facilities, right? So it just didn't make any sense. Now, if you're saying, hey, Sean, you had the luxury, I guess, to use classrooms at other facilities, and you didn't have to pay rent. There's no overhead cost, right? I forgot what I was gonna say. You fall into a different category, right? Well, it's not really a different category because let's just say I didn't have those classrooms, home office. Guys, I had meetings in Starbucks, restaurants with clients, even at the park. Okay, even at the park. I did a guard card class in a public park. I did a pepper spray class in a public park, and we used the concrete benches as the classroom setting. And there was transients walking all over the place. So what I'm saying is you don't need an office until you really need it. And when you need an office, well, I think when your staff is growing, when work out of your house isn't feasible, or it's, maybe you have a conference room that you use for training or consultations. Now, I'll tell you, as a private investigator, you can't really put up signs that say private investigator on it, or private investigations or something like that. What's going to happen is clients are going to be reluctant to go to your business. Let's just say that you suspect infidelity on your partner, right? You're going to go to an office that says Sean's Private Investigations? Think about it. They're mostly operating out of offices that don't have no signage, right? Now, a lot of these clients, what I'm saying is, they like to meet on the corner of X, Y, and Z sometimes. Sometimes at your local coffee shop. Sometimes at their place of business. It just really depends on the client. I'll say that there's a whole lot of advantages with a home office. I'm not a tax guy, I'm not an attorney, but it looks like the tax code allows you to use your home office. And what I mean, use it as a tax write-off. Me making these videos is a tax write-off. I have an app on Intuit QuickBooks that tracks my miles. As long as I'm consulting clients, I think it's using a phone, or as long as I'm consulting with them, then that counts. Is making videos consulting with them, I'd make a huge argument, yes. I'm not saying that this particular video I'm consulting clients, but my clients are on my YouTube channel watching these videos I get at least a couple times out of the week, right? So that's my argument. And guys, there's so much miles that you can write off, and it makes it easier when you actually have an app. Am I making today's video so I can get a tax write-off? I didn't actually think about that until right now, but hey, it helps. You help me, I help you. You watch the video, I get a tax write-off, and maybe you learn something from today. Training, business, you got to be strict, guys. I did firearms, and there's some people that I just kind of wish I was a little bit more assertive at that point in time, and just gave them a refund and tell them to come back after they do their homework, right? So I would maybe give them a lesson on how to properly grip a gun, how to properly observe the safety rules, and then that's it. But again, when you're private sector, it's, I don't want to say it's kind of hard, but at the same time, you have to balance the safety of the community with the needs of the student, right? And clearly, I probably should have disqualified some of the students. Luckily, the BSIS firearms permit expires, or you have to qualify 2 times in the life of the permit, and some of these guys, they went through multiple other training organizations. But anyhow, I own up to my mistakes. I learned. I'm not saying that somebody was passed because they paid. I'm not putting that out there. I'm just saying that there's some things that I definitely should have done in the past, and I am always learning from my mistakes. What else? Instructor cadre, do not be hesitant to hire them, especially when you do firearms. I think it's a good idea to observe the NRA ratio of 1 to 5, meaning that for every 5 students, you should have 1 instructor. However, I learned that even with 1 and 5, in private security, you need an instructor. I mean, you need an additional instructor. What's going to end up happening is 50% of that group of 5, which is technically 2.5, I'd give it 2 or 3 of them need a lot of help. And those 2 or 3 are going to slow down the remainder of the class, to the point where the other students are going to get frustrated. So I highly recommend that you guys abide by the 1 to 5 ratio, and even have 2. I think if you're running 1 and 3, you're fine by yourself. But once you hit 4, I think you probably want another one. And some of you are saying, well, I don't want to lose profits. I don't want to pay an instructor for that. It's a cost-benefit analysis. You could potentially have an accidental discharge. Some call it a negligent discharge, which is a legal term, by the way. That's why I try not to use that term. But in the end, everybody is safer, and you end up not being sued. Well, that's not even a guarantee, right? And also, there's going to be one person that's going to say, hey, I forgot my magazines in my car, which is up the hill. Okay. In that case, you're going to let that student venture off on their own, unsupervised. Well, I think you're gonna need to have like a buffer zone of somebody observing what that student's doing. You don't know if they're going to return with a pistol, load and make ready behind the firing line. For some students, that may be loaded. Like, you might have like 2 students loading magazines while others are going almost close to downrange or the line, and then you don't know what they're doing up there. Like, you actually have to supervise them, because if there's some type of accident, guess who's at fault? You're going to be at fault under the theory of negligence. The standards of the industry is have students supervised at all times. You cannot have a group of students loading ammo on one side, and then have students at the firing side on the other side. It doesn't work out. The only way that you can make it work out is if you deny access to vehicles, deny access to bags, or if you search all bags, you pat down all students for any additional weapons. That's the only way. But then again, you're gonna get that student, oh, he touched me, he groped me. It's just not worth to run a range that small. When you run a baton training facility, again, I was not the instructor, my buddy ran it. I helped them out, but can you run a 1 to 10 ratio as a baton instructor? I don't know. I mean, I don't think it's a good idea. 1 to 5, maybe. But when you go red man, okay, who's going to wear the red man suit? The student? Just think about that. And speaking about red man, again, the first thing that my instructor bought out of his own pocket was the red man suit, the gray one, which is the more expensive. I think he paid like $1,600, right? Now, obviously, that's his expense, and there's times when I just gave him 100% of the profit. He was a good friend of mine, or he still is, and I said, hey man, I'll help you out. I know that you went through some marriage problems. You're living in a trailer. I'm gonna help you out, and I gave him 100% of the profit. And sometimes I just took whatever the expenses was, if there was anything. The expenses was usually I have to pay for the baton permit. So I helped him out as much as I can. But did he really have to buy a red man suit? And the answer is no. And I was telling him, hey man, when you start, when we start making money off of this, significant amount of money, that's when you use that money to buy the red man suit. But I don't know if the value is worth the cost right now. So that was another huge mistake. Now you can't buy the baton permits. Before, they would give you blank baton permits. You buy them $50 each, and then you print out the student's information on it, and it was a lifetime permit, and now it expires. Pepper spray, again, I don't think it's a good idea. I mean, you're going to need to have one instructor staying with the students, maybe spraying them. I mean, if you do live exposure, and then the other portion could help with the decontamination process. And let's just say you have a medical emergency, the class still needs to be somewhat supervised, and then the other students need to be attended to. And then let's just say, you go back to the classroom, and then one student's missing, right? As an instructor, you're going to look for the student? No, if you have a social instructor, that student can look for that person as well. Those of you who operate the tasers, again, I think you need a safety officer. If you run scenarios, you can't be the instructor and part of the scenario as well, because there's nobody observing safety. And the issue I have with any type of reality-based training is people just walking onto the site. Like random people, random members of the public just walking onto the site, and they enter the training. If they enter the scenario area, that's a potential heap of danger for them and liability for you. I ran a couple of active attack drills, early 2010s, and you need a safety officer, because what's going to happen is you're going to get law enforcement, a patrol officer who's driving by, and then they see an active attack, what they perceive as an active attack situation. So just keep in mind, like, you're going to be so zoned in on preparing for class that there's just so much things to do. It's just so much easier and more efficient if you hire an instructor to help you out and delegate some of the responsibilities that you have, right? And one of them is contacting law enforcement. So back in Palm Springs, when I ran my training facility, I'd call the Palm Springs lieutenant. Hey, lieutenant, we're doing active attack training at Brightwood College, off of 2475 Takowitz Drive, Palm Springs. Just to let you know, we'll be doing force on force. Oh, okay, copy that. What's your cell phone number, or what's your number? How do we get a hold of you? Here you go. And then down the hallways where there was like some public view, we would have somebody wearing a reflective vest, and just focusing on law enforcement, making sure law enforcement doesn't pass by and think that something is really going on, because you're going to have that patrol officer that's not going to pay attention to the briefing or the watch commander. Those of you who do DTAC, like arrest and control techniques, again, you can't be the instructor and then the role player. You have nobody observing safety, right? You cannot do both at the same time. And sometimes the instructors, I don't want to say they get out of hand, but they get a little bit motivated. The students get a little bit motivated. You need somebody, you're going to need a second person, somebody in between. And then it also helps to have a secondary instructor to start staging somebody. So what I learned, guys, there's some things that you need to delegate some of your responsibilities to, realizing that ultimately you are still responsible. Whether that be private security operations or training. I know I talked more about the training part of the business. That's because that's where I have the most experience. But for private security operations, if you don't need something, then don't do it. And don't hire staff unless you really need to. Many times you need to. Don't buy something unless you really need it. One last thing I want to mention is don't fall victim to false promises. I had a lot of people coming in. Hey, I work for Allied. Actually, no, I work for Securitas, and I was responsible for contracts. I want to work with you, Sean. I had some of these people that had that experiences, and guys, almost all of them are false promises. They almost never work out. You have to ask yourself, why are you leaving this other security company? It almost never happens. So that's all I got. And then I guess last is, don't have business partners. If you can help it, do not have business partners. I say this every year, and I get phone calls every year. Hey, man, you know what? My business partner and I are not working out. And that includes a spouse. Your spouse should not be your business partner. In my honest opinion, marriages don't work out. Relationships don't work out sometimes. And what do you have? You have a failed business. Giannis Protective Services, there's so much to talk about. I'm not sure if I want to give my 2 cents. No, there's a lot to talk about, and I want to hear from you guys. I know that a couple of you guys commented, but I got to get going right now. I want to hear from you guys in the regular public comments. Do you guys have any suggestions for others starting a security business, maybe even a training business? Giannis is right. There's so much to talk about. I could keep talking for hours, maybe even a 2-day session on this. All right, guys, take care. I'm out.